He called me 3 days after the funeral and said, "You were never really family, Daphne. I'd save yourself the legal fees, for old time's sake." I was standing in his parents' kitchen, still in the black dress I had worn to bury my father-in-law. I said nothing. I hung up and called the estate attorney whose number Harvey had pressed quietly into my hand 2 Christmases ago. She told me to come in Thursday. She had something to show me, she said, something Harvey had left specifically for me. Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. I used to think that being included in a family meant being accepted by all of them, that if one person in the room looked at you sideways, you had somehow failed at the essential task. What Harvey Wexler taught me, without ever saying it directly, is that the opinion of one room is not the verdict of a life. He watched me for 6 years. He watched how I moved through difficult situations, which was quietly and without drama. He liked what he saw. He wrote it down. He wrote it into a legal instrument, and then he waited. That kind of care requires planning, dear listeners. It requires a person to sit down and think, what will happen when I am gone? And then to act on the answer, privately, without announcement. Let me tell you about Daphne Calloway, which is me, and about the Wexler family, which is where I spent 6 years being carefully managed. I had been a registered dental hygienist for 16 years by the time Harvey died. My days were early mornings, overhead lights, the quiet trust of someone opening their mouth to let you see what they are embarrassed by. I worked at a community clinic in Denver's Globeville neighborhood, the kind of practice where half the patients come in with years of delayed pain because they could not afford to come sooner. I was patient with those patients. I did not take things personally. I had grown up in a family that didn't have money and didn't have a financial advisor and didn't expect anything from anyone outside the household. And it had made me, whatever else it had made me, genuinely comfortable in the presence of people who were trying. Harvey Wexler's family was not that. The Wexlers were a Cherry Creek family, brick Tudor on a tree-lined street, the kind of house that has a name for the dining room and a separate room for the silver. Edmund, Harvey's older son, ran a commercial real estate consultancy in Denver's DTC corridor, and billed by the hour and let you know it. Constance, Edmund's wife, was warm to my face and cool in every other signal she transmitted. My husband James, Harvey's younger son, was kind and conflict avoidant, and had spent his life slightly to Edmund's left, close enough to be included, careful enough never to challenge. I had loved James honestly and without calculation. I had loved Harvey the same way. The feeling, it turned out, was mutual. Harvey was 79 when he died, which was unexpected. He had seemed, at 79, like a man who had several more years of opinion left. He died of a cardiac event on a Tuesday morning in February, which is the month Denver gets cold in a particular way. The mountains sharp and too close, the high plains wind coming in flat and without mercy, the city gray and held in place. He had been fine at dinner the previous Saturday. He had not been fine on Tuesday. That is how those things go. Edmund moved fast. Within 48 hours of Harvey's death, Edmund had appointed himself executor of the estate, before the will had been formally located and filed, before the attorney had been contacted, before anyone had sat still long enough to grieve. He began making calls. He organized the service, which was Harvey's house in Cherry Creek, warm inside and decorated for grief the way money decorates grief, with catered food and flowers that match. He excluded me from every service decision, which I understood, in the immediate days, as the efficiency of a man who needed control to manage his grief. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I gave it more than it deserved. The first sign that something deliberate was happening arrived in the weeks before Harvey's death, when Edmund had begun to ask me, in social settings, variations on a single question: whether James and I were still planning to stay in Denver long term. The question sounded like small talk. It was not small talk. He was mapping who would make claims and from where. I had answered honestly, as I always did, and had not thought much of it. The second sign was a Christmas card. Harvey had sent me one the December before he died, signed in his own careful handwriting on the inside flap below the printed message. He had written, "Everything is taken care of. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I had kept the card in my kitchen drawer because he never gave cards. I had read the note twice and then not known what to do with it. I placed it back in the drawer. On the morning of Edmund's phone call, I went to the drawer and read it a third time. Then I found the attorney's card, the one Harvey had pressed into my palm at a Christmas party 2 years before, with the particular deliberate casualness of a man putting something in a safe place. Edmund called on a Thursday afternoon, 4 days after the funeral. I was still at the Cherry Creek house, helping stack plates in the kitchen, because that is what I do when I do not know what else to do, when my phone rang. He did not begin with a greeting. He said, "I wanted to speak with you before the estate process gets formal." He told me the estate was structured through the family trust. He said the trust had been set up to distribute assets to the direct family. He used the word direct twice. He said he was telling me as a courtesy. He paused, and then he said, "You were never really family, Daphne. I'd save yourself the legal fees for old time's sake." I was holding a glass of water. I set it on the counter. I did not say, "Harvey gave me his attorney's card 2 Christmases ago." I did not say, "He sent me a card in December that I have been rereading since you called." I said, "Thank you, Edmund." I ended the call. I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, found Rhonda Page's card in my wallet, and made the call. Rhonda Page had been Harvey's estate attorney for 22 years. She was a solo practitioner in Denver's Lodo neighborhood, small, precisely dressed, with a habit of removing her glasses when she wanted you to understand that she was speaking carefully. She had handled every revision of Harvey's estate documents over the span of their professional relationship. She knew everything Harvey had prepared. She knew it before I did. When I called her that Thursday afternoon and told her what Edmund had said, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Come in Thursday morning. I have something Harvey left for you specifically." I drove home that night through the February cold, the mountains invisible behind the weather, the city dark. My husband James sat beside me and said nothing. He had not been present for Edmund's call, and I had told him only that Edmund had suggested I would not be in the will. James was quiet, which I understood. He loved his brother. He would not choose sides. I was alone with what I knew and what I didn't yet know, and the actual grief, the loss of Harvey, who had been uncomplicated in his kindness, who had found my quietness a relief in a family where everyone performed, was the real thing underneath all the noise Edmund was making. I got home and read Harvey's Christmas card again. "Everything is taken care of. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I put it back in the drawer. I made tea. I went to bed. Rhonda's office was on the 12th floor of a building in Lodo, with a view of the 16th Street Mall going gray under February slush. The furniture was warm cherry wood, the kind of office designed to make the delivery of significant news feel manageable. Rhonda set a folder on the table between us and removed her glasses. She told me she had drafted a codicil to Harvey's existing will 8 months before his death. Harvey had called her and asked her to come to the house, which he rarely did, and had told her exactly what he wanted. He had been clear, she said. He had been very much himself. The codicil was a separate testamentary instrument, executed with 2 witnesses and a notary, filed in Rhonda's office with instructions that it not be disclosed during Harvey's lifetime. It left Harvey's cabin property outside Evergreen, a simple A-frame he had used as a refuge from Cherry Creek and from Edmund, appraised at $580,000, along with the entirety of a personal brokerage account then holding $2.2 million, directly to Daphne Calloway. Not in trust, not through Edmund's estate administration, not contingent on any condition, outright. The total value was $2.78 million. Harvey had also drafted a 2-page letter by hand and given it to Rhonda with instructions to pass it to me at the formal reading. Rhonda produced the sealed envelope and set it on the table. It was addressed in Harvey's handwriting, for Daphne only. I looked at the envelope. The morning light came flat and gray through the 12th floor window, the city below going about its February business, indifferent and ordinary. I set my hand on the envelope and left it sealed. I would open it alone. Edmund received formal notice of the codicil from Rhonda's office on a Monday morning, a cover letter, a copy of the executed document, a summary of the assets named. I was told he called Rhonda's office 3 times that day. She did not take his calls. He retained a litigator who sent a letter challenging the codicil on grounds of undue influence, the suggestion that I had somehow manipulated Harvey into making the bequest. The word manipulated appeared twice in the letter. I read it at my kitchen table with my coffee and thought about what manipulation would have looked like, given that Harvey had initiated every step himself, had called Rhonda without prompting, and had executed the codicil 8 months before his death with full witnesses and notarization. Rhonda responded with the witness affidavits and the notary record, and with a letter from Harvey's physician confirming that at the time of execution, Harvey was in full cognitive health and had, in his physician's words, presented as entirely himself. Then Edmund's attorney raised a second argument, that the brokerage account might be subject to the family trust's terms. Rhonda pulled the trust agreement and highlighted the relevant section in yellow. Personal brokerage accounts held in Harvey's individual name had never been placed under the trust's administration. They were not trust assets. The trust agreement said so explicitly. Edmund had been managing his father's estate documents for years. He had apparently not read that section. The attorney went quiet after Rhonda's second letter. The challenge was withdrawn within 30 days. Edmund had nothing left to argue with, and he had spent those 30 days learning that the harder you push against a valid testamentary instrument supported by 2 witnesses, a notary, medical capacity confirmation, and 22 years of attorney-client relationship, the more clearly you demonstrate that you have no case. The formal reading was held at Rhonda's office on a Thursday in late February. Edmund arrived with his attorney and Constance. I arrived with Rhonda and sat across the conference table, my hands in my lap, the sealed envelope in front of me. Edmund had composed himself, the politician's composure of a man who has lost and intends to perform dignity through the losing. Rhonda read through the primary will and trust summary. The Cherry Creek house and the primary investment accounts distributed to Edmund and James in equal shares, as Harvey had always intended and as Edmund had always expected. Edmund nodded. He was still performing. Then Rhonda picked up the codicil. She read it in full, including the asset values. $580,000 for the Evergreen cabin, $2.2 million in the brokerage account. Total, $2.78 million. Specifically and irrevocably to Daphne Calloway. Edmund's attorney set down his pen. Edmund sat very still. Constance looked at her hands. Rhonda set the documents on the table and produced the sealed envelope. She slid it across to me. "For Daphne only," she said, reading Harvey's instruction aloud. Edmund looked at the envelope. He looked at the table. He looked at his attorney. Then he looked out the window, very deliberately, out toward the 16th Street Mall and the February slush, and did not look back. There was nothing left for him to say. Harvey had said everything. I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath Rhonda's building and opened the envelope. The garage smelled of exhaust and damp concrete, the fluorescent light flickering slightly overhead. Total privacy. I put on my coat properly and read the 2 pages Harvey had written by hand in the careful, deliberate handwriting of a man who had spent his life in precision. I will not tell you everything in the letter, dear listeners, because he addressed it only to me. But I will tell you one line. He wrote, "You never wanted anything from this family except to be part of it. That is the rarest thing I have seen in 80 years. I sat in the garage for a long time after I finished reading. Then I drove home. The brokerage account transferred within 60 days of the formal reading, right of survivorship, no probate required. The cabin transferred by deed shortly after, Rhonda's office handling the recording. I did not move immediately. I did not change my job. I kept seeing my patients at the clinic in Globeville, the ones with the delayed pain and the careful gratitude. I kept making my Tuesday rounds. I went to the Evergreen cabin once, in summer, alone, the A-frame sitting low under the pines, the air smelling of altitude and pine resin, the quiet that Harvey had driven there to find. I sat on the porch for an hour and thought about him. The emotional weight of this story, dear listeners, is not the money. The money is the vehicle Harvey used to say something he had decided mattered more than his family's expectations of him. The grief was real, and the windfall arrived inside it, and the two did not cancel each other out. Harvey was gone. The letter in my hand was the last complete sentence he ever composed for me. I kept it in the kitchen drawer, next to the Christmas card, where I could find it without looking. James and I have not spoken about Edmund directly. Some things in a marriage are understood without naming. Edmund and I have not spoken since the formal reading. I have not contacted him. I have nothing to say that Rhonda's letters and Harvey's codicil do not already say better. The most careful acts of love are the ones nobody sees coming. Pay attention to the people who watch you closely and quietly over a long time. They are leaving you something. Harvey left me a cabin and an account and a letter. He left me the knowledge that someone in that family had seen me exactly as I was and had found it worth protecting. That is the inheritance that does not transfer by deed. If someone in your life had ever dismissed you the way Edmund dismissed me, before the reading, before the documents, with such certainty, what would you have done in that moment? Tell me in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And thank you, as always, for listening. Let me tell you a few more things about those weeks, dear listeners, because the space between Edmund's call and the formal reading was not empty. After Rhonda confirmed the codicil's existence that first Thursday, I had a choice. Tell James or wait. I chose to wait. Not from calculation, from grief, mostly. James was losing his father. He was negotiating, in his quiet way, the version of himself that would exist without Harvey in it. I did not want to introduce the codicil into that process. I was already carrying it. I could carry it a little longer. The evergreen cabin had been a place Harvey mentioned occasionally. Not often, not with sentiment, the way he mentioned most things he truly cared about. He would say he had driven up Saturday, that the road had been clear, that the air was different at that elevation. I had visited once, 3 summers earlier, when Harvey had invited James and me for a weekend. It was a simple structure, 1 main room, a sleeping loft, a porch that faced west into the mountains. Harvey had made coffee on a propane stove and served it in mismatched mugs and said nothing for an hour, which was the most comfortable hour I had spent with anyone in the Wexler family. Edmund had been invited but had not come. He had a development conference that weekend. I had noted, without commentary, what his absence said about how he used his time. The cabin's appraised value was $580,000. Edmund had been expecting to absorb it into a family LLC he managed. He had mentioned the LLC to James once, at a family dinner, in the specific tone of a man announcing a plan he considers already decided. James had nodded. I had noted. Harvey, it turned out, had noted too. He had a clearer sense than any of us realized of exactly what Edmund intended to do with his belongings. The brokerage account was something I had known nothing about. Harvey had maintained it in his own name, funded over decades from savings that he had kept entirely separate from the family trust. He had been a careful man with money, not in the anxious way, but in the precise way, the way of someone who has watched money handled carelessly by other people and decided to be different. He had told Rhonda, she said, that he had been building the account for 20 years with a specific purpose in mind that he had not yet named to anyone. When he finally named it, he named me. Rhonda handled every step with the efficiency and thoroughness of someone who had been planning this execution for 8 months alongside her client. When Edmund's attorney made the undue influence argument, she responded within 48 hours. When the trust asset question was raised, she responded within 24. She did not waste words, and she did not perform. She simply deployed the instruments Harvey had left in her hands. That is what a good attorney does. That is also, in a different register, what Harvey had done for me. The cabin sits in the foothills above Evergreen at about 7,000 feet. I drove there alone in June, after the deed had transferred. The road climbs through lodgepole pine and opens suddenly into a meadow, and then the A-frame is there, small and certain, exactly where Harvey had always said it was. I sat on the porch with the coffee I had made on the same propane stove and watched the afternoon light change over the mountains to the west. The coffee was good. The air was different at that elevation. Harvey had been right about that. as he had been right about most things he decided were worth saying.